When you stand before the figure of Darth Vader for the first time, when you hear that mechanical breathing echoing through the corridors of an Imperial Star Destroyer, when you witness the crimson blade of his lightsaber igniting in the darkness, you're encountering something more than just a villain. You're facing the physical embodiment of tragedy, of power corrupted, of a soul that fell so far into darkness that redemption seemed impossible. The black armor, the towering presence, the voice that commands absolute obedience, all of it speaks to a transformation so complete, so devastating, that the man who once was has been utterly consumed by the monster he became. This is Darth Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith, the Emperor's enforcer, the most feared being in the entire galaxy during the reign of the Galactic Empire. But before the mask, before the mechanical breathing, before the red lightsaber and the Force chokes, and the absolute terror he inspired in anyone who crossed his path, there was a boy, a slave child on a desert planet who dreamed of freedom, who possessed gifts beyond measure, who would grow up to become first a hero of legend and then a villain of nightmare. Understanding Vader means understanding Anakin Skywalker, because you cannot separate the darkness from the light that preceded it. The fall was not instantaneous. It was gradual, painful, a descent fueled by fear and loss and manipulation, until the moment when the man named Anakin Skywalker ceased to exist and only Darth Vader remained. The story begins on Tatooine, a harsh desert world in the Outer Rim, where the Galactic Republic holds no power and slavery remains a grim reality. Here, in the junk shops and slave quarters of Mos Espa, a young boy named Anakin Skywalker lived with his mother Shmi. They were slaves, property owned first by Gardulla the Hutt and then by a Toydarian junk dealer named Watto. Anakin's early years were defined by servitude, by the knowledge that he could be sold at any moment, separated from his mother on the whim of masters who viewed him as little more than a tool to be used or a prize to be wagered. Life under Gardulla the Hutt was particularly brutal. The Hutt was known for her cruelty, for killing slaves to demonstrate her power to guests, for creating an atmosphere of terror among those she owned. Anakin witnessed things no child should see. He remembered slaves who tried to escape, their bodies erupting in small explosions from the devices implanted to prevent such attempts. He remembered being transported in crates designed for cargo, treated as an object rather than a person. These experiences marked him, shaped him, created within him a hatred for slavery and slavers that would never truly leave him, even when he had transformed into something far darker. When Watto won Anakin and Shmi from Gardulla through a pod racing bet, their conditions improved somewhat. They were given their own hovel in Slave Quarters Row rather than sharing cramped spaces with numerous other slaves. Watto, while still a slave owner, was less overtly cruel than Gardulla. He recognized Anakin's mechanical talents, his natural ability to repair and build technology. The boy could fix anything, could sense what was wrong with machinery almost instinctively. Watto put these skills to use in his junk shop, employing Anakin to work on salvaged equipment, to deal with Jawas for spare parts, to help maintain the business. But Watto also discovered something else about Anakin. The boy could pod race. In a sport where humans were believed to have no chance, where the reflexes required seemed beyond human capability, 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker could pilot a pod racer with astonishing skill. Watto, always looking for profit, began entering Anakin in races, even as he often bet against his own slave. The calculation was simple. If Anakin lost, Watto made money. If Anakin won, Watto kept his valuable mechanic slave. Either outcome benefited the Toydarian, while Anakin risked his life in one of the most dangerous sports the galaxy had ever conceived. What Watto didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly understand, was the source of Anakin's abilities. The boy wasn't simply talented or lucky. He was strong in the Force, stronger than perhaps anyone had been in generations. his reflexes, his mechanical intuition, his ability to sense things before they happened. All of it came from his connection to an energy field that bound the galaxy together. Anakin didn't know this. His mother didn't know this. But the Force was there, working through him, guiding him, waiting for the moment when someone would recognize what he was. That moment came in the form of Qui-Gon Jinn. The Jedi Master had landed on Tatooine with Queen Amidala and her entourage, their ship damaged and in need of repairs. Qui-Gon entered Watto's shop seeking parts, and there he encountered a slave boy who would change the fate of the entire galaxy. The Jedi sensed immediately that Anakin was different. He could feel the Force radiating from the child. When Qui-Gon learned that Anakin had no father, that Shmi had simply become pregnant through means she couldn't explain, the Jedi began to suspect something extraordinary. Could this boy be the chosen one, the being prophesied to bring balance to the Force? Qui-Gon tested Anakin's midi-chlorian count, the microscopic life forms that connected living beings to the Force. The results were staggering. Anakin's midi-chlorian count exceeded even Master Yoda's, suggesting a connection to the Force stronger than any Jedi had ever encountered. This slave child on a backwater planet was potentially the most powerful Force-sensitive being alive. Qui-Gon knew he had to free Anakin, had to bring him to the Jedi Temple for training. But Watto would not simply release his valuable slave. The negotiations led to a wager. Anakin would race in the Boonta Eve Classic pod race. If he won, he would be free. If he lost, Qui-Gon would forfeit his ship. The race itself was a defining moment. Anakin, at just 9 years old, competed against experienced racers, including the brutal Dug named Sebulba. The dangers were immense. Pod racers crashed and exploded regularly. The track wound through treacherous terrain. Other racers actively tried to destroy their competition, but Anakin flew with an instinct and precision that seemed impossible. He navigated obstacles, recovered from sabotage attempts, and ultimately crossed the finish line first. He won his freedom, though the terms of the wager meant his mother remained enslaved. The parting was agonizing. Shmi told her son not to look back, to be brave, to embrace the opportunity before him. Anakin promised he would return for her, would free her one day. It was a promise that would haunt him. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was overwhelming for a child from the Outer Rim. The towering spires, the thousands of Jedi, the entire weight of an ancient order devoted to understanding and serving the Force. Qui-Gon presented Anakin to the Jedi Council, arguing that the boy should be trained despite his age. The Council was reluctant. Yoda sensed fear in the boy, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. Mace Windu noted that Anakin was too old, that 9 years was well beyond the age when Jedi training typically began. The concern was valid. Jedi training started in infancy specifically to prevent attachments, to create beings devoted to the Order rather than to individuals. Anakin already had attachments. He loved his mother deeply. He feared her remaining in slavery. These emotions, the Council worried, could lead to darkness. The debate became moot when Qui-Gon was killed by the Sith Lord Darth Maul during the Battle of Naboo. As he died, Qui-Gon made his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi promise to train Anakin. Obi-Wan, newly elevated to Jedi Knight, took on the responsibility despite his youth and inexperience. He would train Anakin Skywalker, fulfill his master's dying wish, and try to guide the Chosen One toward his destiny. What Obi-Wan couldn't know, what none of them could know, was that Qui-Gon's death had already begun pushing Anakin toward darkness. The Jedi who believed in him, who freed him, who saw his potential, was gone. Anakin would train under Obi-Wan, would learn to become a Jedi, but the wound of that loss never fully healed. The years between the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones saw Anakin grow from boy to man. Under Obi-Wan's tutelage, he became one of the most skilled Jedi of his generation. His lightsaber abilities were exceptional, his connection to the Force profound. He could do things other Jedi struggled with, could sense presences across vast distances, could manipulate objects with casual precision. But he was also impatient, arrogant, convinced of his own superiority. Obi-Wan tried to teach him humility, tried to instill the Jedi virtues of patience and emotional control. The lessons never quite took hold. Anakin chafed under restrictions, questioned the Council's decisions, believed the Jedi Order was too passive, too bound by rules that limited their ability to help people. Then came his reunion with Padme Amidala. The queen he'd met as a child was now a senator, and Anakin was assigned to protect her from assassination attempts. The attraction was immediate and intense. Padme was everything Anakin admired. Strong, intelligent, dedicated to helping people. For Padme, the mechanical slave boy had grown into a confident young man, powerful and devoted to her safety. They fell in love during their time on Naboo, away from the Jedi Temple and the demands of the Senate. The love was forbidden. Jedi were not permitted attachments, but Anakin had spent his life being told what he couldn't do, and he wasn't about to let the Order's rules prevent him from being with the woman he loved. The nightmares began around this time. Visions of his mother in pain, suffering, dying. The dreams plagued Anakin, disrupting his sleep, filling him with dread. He confided in Padme, and she encouraged him to go to Tatooine, to check on his mother, to ease his mind. What Anakin found on Tatooine shattered something inside him. Shmi had been freed by a moisture farmer named Cliegg Lars, who had married her. For a time, she'd been happy. But then Tusken raiders had attacked the Lars homestead, capturing Shmi and dragging her into the desert. Cliegg had tried to rescue her with a group of settlers, but they'd been slaughtered. Shmi had been held captive for weeks, tortured, left to die slowly in a Tusken camp. Anakin tracked the Tuskens through the Force. He found his mother in a tent, barely alive, her body broken by the abuse she'd endured. She died in his arms, and something snapped. The rage that had been building in Anakin throughout his life, the anger at slavery, at injustice, at his powerlessness to protect those he loved, erupted. He slaughtered the Tusken Raiders. Not just the warriors. Everyone. Men, women, children. He cut through the camp with his lightsaber, letting his fury guide him, channeling the dark side of the Force without even realizing it. When Padme found him afterwards, Anakin was sobbing, horrified by what he'd done, yet still consumed by his hatred. He'd committed massacre, violated everything the Jedi stood for, and he knew it. But part of him didn't care. Part of him felt the Tuskens deserved it for what they'd done to his mother. The Clone Wars transformed Anakin from a troubled Padawan into a legendary warrior. The galaxy-spanning conflict between the Republic and the Separatists gave him opportunities to prove himself in battle after battle. He became a general, leading clone troopers into combat, executing daring strategies, winning victories that seemed impossible. The soldiers under his command admired him because he fought alongside them, shared their dangers, valued their lives in ways other Jedi sometimes didn't. Anakin remembered slavery, remembered being viewed as disposable. He refused to treat the clones that way. They were people to him, individuals deserving respect. This earned their loyalty, their willingness to follow him into any situation. He also gained a Padawan of his own. Ahsoka Tano was assigned to Anakin during the Clone Wars, and initially he resisted. He didn't want the responsibility. But Ahsoka proved herself quickly, her determination and skill earning Anakin's respect. He trained her, fought beside her, came to view her almost as a younger sister. Their bond was deep, built on mutual trust and shared combat. When Ahsoka was falsely accused of bombing the Jedi Temple and expelled from the Order, Anakin fought to prove her innocence. He succeeded, exposing the real culprit, but Ahsoka chose not to return to the Jedi. The Order had failed her, had been willing to execute her without proper evidence. Her departure shook Anakin's faith in the Jedi Council, reinforced his belief that the Order was flawed, that their adherence to tradition blinded them to justice. Throughout the Clone Wars, Anakin's relationship with Supreme Chancellor Palpatine deepened. The Chancellor had taken an interest in the young Jedi years earlier, had watched his career with apparent benevolence. Palpatine was everything Anakin felt the Jedi Council wasn't. He listened without judgment. He encouraged Anakin's ambitions. He suggested that power and strength were not things to be ashamed of, but tools to be embraced. The Chancellor became a mentor, a father figure, someone Anakin trusted implicitly. What Anakin didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that Palpatine was Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith orchestrating the entire war. Every conversation, every piece of advice, every moment of seeming kindness was manipulation. Palpatine was grooming Anakin, preparing him for the moment when he would fall to the dark side. Anakin had also secretly married Padme. The ceremony was small, private, witnessed only by droids. It violated every Jedi precept about attachment. But Anakin didn't care. Padme was his anchor, his reason for fighting. He loved her completely, and she loved him. They kept the marriage hidden, meeting in secret when duties allowed, building a life together in the shadows. When Padme became pregnant, Anakin was initially overjoyed. But the joy quickly transformed into terror. The nightmares began again. Visions of Padme dying in childbirth, her life slipping away while Anakin stood powerless to save her. The dreams were vivid, detailed, horrifying. He'd seen his mother's death in visions and failed to prevent it. He couldn't let the same fate befall Padme. The fear consumed him. He confided in Yoda, but the Jedi Master's advice was to let go of his attachments, to accept death as a natural part of life. To Anakin, this was unacceptable. He wouldn't lose Padme. He couldn't. There had to be a way to save her. Palpatine sensed Anakin's desperation and exploited it masterfully. The Chancellor revealed himself as Darth Sidious, admitted he was a Sith Lord, but framed it as offering Anakin a choice. The Jedi, Palpatine argued, were dogmatic, limited by their fear of the dark side. The Sith understood that the Force had no inherent morality. It was simply power, and that power could be used to accomplish anything, including cheating death. Palpatine told Anakin about Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith Lord so powerful he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life, to prevent people from dying. Plagueis had been Palpatine's master, and while Plagueis himself had eventually died, his knowledge could be learned. If Anakin turned to the dark side, if he became Palpatine's apprentice, he could gain the power to save Padme. The offer was everything Anakin wanted and everything he'd been taught to fear. He was torn, conflicted, horrified that the Chancellor was a Sith, yet desperate for the knowledge he promised. Anakin initially chose duty, reporting Palpatine to Mace Windu and the Jedi Council. The Jedi Master took a team to arrest the Chancellor, and Anakin was ordered to wait at the temple. But Anakin couldn't stay away. His fear for Padme drove him to Palpatine's office, where he found Mace Windu preparing to execute the Sith Lord. Palpatine was apparently helpless, begging for mercy, claiming the Jedi were traitors attempting a coup. Windu argued that Palpatine was too dangerous to be taken alive, that he controlled the Senate and the courts, that execution was the only option. In that moment, Anakin made his choice. He couldn't let Palpatine die, couldn't lose the knowledge that might save Padme. He attacked Mace Windu, severing the Jedi Master's hand with his lightsaber, allowing Palpatine to kill Windu with Force lightning. The Jedi Master fell from the window, plummeting to his death. Anakin had betrayed the Order. He'd killed a Jedi Master. There was no going back. Anakin knelt before Darth Sidious and pledged himself to the Sith. He was christened Darth Vader, though he was still recognizably Anakin Skywalker, still the man who loved Padme and feared for her life. Palpatine's first commands tested his new apprentice's commitment. Vader was to lead a battalion of clone troopers to the Jedi Temple and execute everyone inside. The Jedi had to be eliminated, their order destroyed. Vader obeyed. He marched into the temple with the 501st Legion, his lightsaber burning blue, and began the slaughter. He killed Jedi Knights, Jedi Masters, even the younglings, children who looked at him with trust and confusion as he cut them down. The massacre was methodical, brutal, complete. By the time it ended, the Jedi Temple was a tomb. Vader's next assignment was Mustafar. The Separatist leaders, believing the war was ending, had gathered in their fortress on the volcanic planet. Palpatine wanted them eliminated. They'd served their purpose, and now they were liabilities. Vader traveled to Mustafar and slaughtered the Separatist Council without hesitation. These were the beings responsible for the Clone Wars, for billions of deaths across the galaxy. Vader killed them all, ending the war in blood. But Padme had seen through Anakin's lies, had sensed something was terribly wrong. She traveled to Mustafar, hoping to bring him back, to make him see what he'd become. Obi-Wan, suspecting the truth, stowed away on her ship. The confrontation on Mustafar was the moment when Anakin Skywalker truly died. Padme pleaded with him to stop, to come away with her, to abandon this path. Vader saw only her refusal to understand, her failure to recognize that everything he'd done was for her. When he saw Obi-Wan emerge from her ship, Vader's rage exploded. He believed Padme had betrayed him, had brought his former master to kill him. He used the Force to choke her, squeezing her throat until she collapsed unconscious. Obi-Wan attacked, and the duel that followed was apocalyptic. Master and apprentice, two of the greatest lightsaber duelists alive, fought across the hellscape of Mustafar. They battled through the Separatist fortress, across crumbling structures over rivers of lava, their blades clashing in a fight fueled by betrayal and loss. Obi-Wan ultimately gained the high ground, a position Vader's arrogance led him to challenge. He leaped, attempting to strike his master down, and Obi-Wan's blade severed both his legs and his remaining organic arm. Vader collapsed near the edge of a lava river, his body broken, his flesh beginning to burn. Obi-Wan took Vader's lightsaber and left him there, unable to kill his former apprentice, but believing he would die from his injuries. Vader didn't die. He dragged himself away from the lava, his body charred, his lungs seared by the toxic atmosphere. The pain was unimaginable. He'd lost everything: his limbs, his body, Padme, his unborn children, his identity as a Jedi. All that remained was agony and hatred. Palpatine found him there and brought him to a medical facility. The surgeries took hours. Vader's remaining organic parts were few. His legs were replaced with cybernetic prosthetics. His arms were rebuilt. His lungs were too damaged to function normally, requiring a breathing apparatus implanted in his chest. His skin, what remained of it, was covered with synthetic flesh that itched constantly. The scarring was so severe that he could never remove his armor without life support equipment. A helmet was sealed to his head, neural needles piercing his skull to interface with his mechanical body. When Vader finally awoke, when he asked about Padme, Palpatine delivered the final blow. She was dead. She had died giving birth. Vader, in his anger, had killed her. The information was only partially true. Padme had indeed died, but not directly from Vader's Force choke. She'd lost the will to live, heartbroken by Anakin's fall to darkness. But Vader believed he'd killed her himself. The knowledge shattered what remained of Anakin Skywalker's soul. He screamed, his anguish channeled through the Force so powerfully that objects around him exploded. He'd done everything to save Padme, had betrayed the Jedi, had slaughtered innocents, had turned to the dark side, and she was dead anyway. He'd killed her. The last light in his life was extinguished, and only darkness remained. Anakin Skywalker was gone. Darth Vader had fully emerged. The armor Vader wore was both a technological marvel and a torture device. Palpatine had deliberately chosen outdated technology for the cybernetics, ensuring the suit was uncomfortable, unreliable, and vulnerable. The Emperor wanted Vader dependent, wanted him constantly reminded of his failure, wanted the pain to fuel his connection to the dark side. The armor was made of durasteel and obsidian, heavy and restricting. Vader's cybernetic limbs were strong, but limited his mobility. He could no longer perform the acrobatic techniques he'd mastered as Anakin. His fighting style had to adapt, becoming more economical, more focused on power rather than agility. The helmet was perhaps the most torturous component. It was bolted to Vader's skull through metal pins, creating constant discomfort. The neural interface allowed his brain to control his mechanical body, but the connections were faulty, requiring regular maintenance. The mask regulated his breathing, drawing air through damaged lungs that could barely process oxygen on their own. Every breath required the suit's assistance, creating the mechanical sound that became Vader's signature. The monitoring systems on his chest plate beeped frequently, and often for no reason, a constant reminder of how precariously his life balanced on technology that could fail at any moment. Vader's vision was augmented through the helmet's lenses, granting him enhanced sight in darkness and various environmental conditions. But the enhancements came at the cost of depth perception and peripheral vision. His hearing was similarly modified, able to detect sounds beyond normal human range, but filtered through electronic systems. Every sense Vader experienced was mediated through machinery, separating him from direct connection to the physical world. He could never taste food properly, could barely sleep due to discomfort, could never feel the touch of another person's skin against his own. The armor made him powerful, but it also made him less human with each passing day. The suit was also deliberately vulnerable to Force lightning. Palpatine ensured this weakness remained, a failsafe that would allow the Emperor to kill his apprentice should Vader ever turn against him. The vulnerability meant Vader couldn't generate his own Force lightning without risking catastrophic damage to his life support systems. When other Sith used the power, Vader had to rely on deflection or evasion rather than generating his own bolts. This limitation frustrated him, but Palpatine was clear. Any attempt to upgrade the armor without permission would be viewed as treason, and the Emperor had loyal technicians who would report such activities immediately. Despite these limitations, Vader adapted. He learned to use the Force to compensate for his armor's restrictions. When speed was needed, he enhanced his movements through the Force. When strength was required beyond his cybernetic capabilities, he channeled the Force through his limbs. The pain of his existence became fuel for his dark side power, a constant source of rage and hatred that made him devastatingly powerful. Vader could crush objects with casual gestures, could sense presences across vast distances, could manipulate the Force with precision that few could match. His telekinetic abilities were extraordinary, capable of stopping starfighter-level weapons in mid-flight or hurling massive objects at opponents. Vader's lightsaber combat evolved to match his new physical reality. As Anakin, he'd favored Form 5, specifically the variant called Gem So, which emphasized powerful counterattacks following defensive blocks. As Vader, he retained Form 5 as his foundation, but incorporated elements of other styles to compensate for his limitations. He learned Form 2 techniques from studying Count Dooku's style, adding precision fencing moves to his repertoire. He incorporated Form 3 defensive techniques to protect his vulnerable chest plate and life support systems. Most importantly, he adopted Dunmuksh, an ancient Sith technique focused on psychological warfare, using the Force to instill fear and doubt in opponents during combat. The combination made Vader nearly unbeatable in lightsaber duels. His strength, enhanced by cybernetics and the Force, allowed him to deliver crushing blows that few could withstand. His precision ensured every strike was placed perfectly, targeting weak points and vital areas. His defense was impenetrable, his blade always positioned to protect his life support systems. Most devastatingly, his mere presence often defeated opponents before the duel even began. Facing Darth Vader meant confronting the full weight of the dark side, feeling your own fear weaponized against you, watching as your confidence crumbled under his psychological assault. Many Jedi survivors of Order 66 were hunted down by Vader, and few survived their encounters with him. In the early years of the Empire, Vader undertook a task crucial to his identity as a Sith. He needed a lightsaber. The blue blade he'd wielded as a Jedi was lost on Mustafar, taken by Obi-Wan. Sith tradition required constructing a new weapon, and the process began with obtaining a kyber crystal from a Jedi. Vader tracked down a Jedi Master, killed him in combat, and claimed his lightsaber. The crystal inside was still attuned to the light side, still resonated with the Force as the Jedi had used it. Vader had to corrupt it through a process called bleeding. Bleeding a kyber crystal required pouring rage, hatred, pain, and suffering into the crystal until it resonated with the dark side instead. Vader meditated on Mustafar, the planet where he'd lost everything, channeling all his anguish into the crystal. He focused on his hatred for Obi-Wan, his fury at the Jedi Council, his pain at Padme's death, his rage at his own disfigurement. The crystal resisted initially, its natural attunement to the light side fighting against the corruption. But Vader's power was overwhelming. He broke the crystal's will, forced it to accept his darkness, transformed it from the blue or green of the Jedi to the crimson red of the Sith. The bleeding process was exhausting, painful, a metaphor for Vader's own transformation. The crystal that emerged was a thing of darkness, and when ignited, it produced the red blade that would become synonymous with Darth Vader. Vader's role in the Empire was multifaceted. He served as Palpatine's enforcer, executing the Emperor's will throughout the galaxy. When a planet considered rebellion, Vader was sent to remind them of the consequences. When Imperial officers failed their duties, Vader arrived to dispense judgment, often through force choking the incompetent until they learned to succeed or died trying. He led military operations against rebel cells, coordinated the Inquisitorius in their hunts for surviving Jedi, and generally represented the terrifying might of the Empire. His reputation grew with each year. Stories spread of his power, his ruthlessness, his inability to be stopped. Vader became myth and nightmare, the embodiment of Imperial authority. But Vader also had a personal fortress, a place where he could retreat from his duties. He chose Mustafar for his castle, the planet of his greatest defeat. The decision wasn't masochism, though the reminder of his fall certainly fueled his dark side connection. Mustafar sat atop a powerful dark side nexus, a concentration of malevolent force energy that had existed for millennia. The nexus was connected to an ancient Sith temple, ruins of structures built by the Sith thousands of years ago. Vader wanted to harness that power, to use it for his own purposes. The construction of Fortress Vader was overseen by the spirit of an ancient Sith named Darth Momin. Momin had been an architect and artist obsessed with the dark side, who believed suffering and pain were the ultimate forms of artistic expression. He'd died centuries ago, but his consciousness had been preserved in a mask. Palpatine found the mask in the Jedi archives and gave it to Vader as a gift. When worn by someone, the mask allowed Momin's spirit to possess them. Vader allowed Momin to design his fortress, understanding the Sith Lord's expertise in channeling dark side energies. Momin's design was brilliant and sinister. The fortress was built directly over the dark side nexus, with tuning towers that channeled the force energies upward. The castle itself was a conduit, focusing the power of the nexus into specific chambers. Momin claimed the design would allow Vader to open a doorway to another dimension, a realm where the barrier between life and death was thin. Vader understood what this meant. Mustafa's nexus was created thousands of years ago when a Force-sensitive named Lady Corvax attempted to resurrect her dead husband. She'd used an artifact called the Bright Star, draining the life from Mustafa in the process, transforming the lush world into a volcanic hellscape. The ritual had partially succeeded, bringing her husband back as a wraith. Vader believed he could use the same power, refined through Momin's architecture, to bring back Padme. The construction took multiple attempts. Momin built 8 different fortress designs, each attempting to properly focus the Nexus energy. Each failed, destroyed by the dark side forces unleashed, or by attacks from native Mustafarians. On the 9th attempt, the design finally worked. The fortress opened a portal, a doorway into a dimension where spirits dwelled. Momin betrayed Vader at this moment, using the portal to resurrect himself, pulling his original body through from wherever it had been preserved. Vader was forced to fight and kill Momin, destroying the resurrected Sith Lord. With Momin dead, Vader entered the portal himself, searching for Padme's spirit. He found nothing. She wasn't there, or she wouldn't come to him. The portal offered no salvation, no way to undo his greatest failure. Vader emerged empty-handed and used the fortress's power to destroy the portal. The attempt to resurrect Padme was over. She was truly gone. Fortress Vader became his residence after that. The castle sat on the lava plains, a dark spire rising from the molten surface, its towers tuning the dark side energies that permeated Mustafar. Inside, Vader had meditation chambers where he could remove his armor and survive in specialized environments. Bacta tanks allowed him to float in the healing fluid, easing the constant pain of his injuries. The throne room afforded views of Mustafar's volcanic landscape, a reminder of his transformation. Here, Vader could be alone with his thoughts, with his rage, with his loss. The fortress was both a refuge and a prison, a place where the most powerful enforcer in the Empire confronted his own failures and pain. The castle also served practical purposes. Vader met with Imperial officials there, issued commands from his throne room, coordinated operations throughout his territories. Director Orson Krennic was summoned to Mustafar to discuss the Death Star project, and Vader made clear that the superweapon should remain secret until the Emperor deemed it ready to reveal. When Krennic tried to claim more credit for the Death Star, Vader Force choked him as a reminder of his place in the Imperial hierarchy. The interaction demonstrated Vader's authority. Even high-ranking Imperial officers answered to him, and failure or overreach was met, with immediate, often lethal consequences. Vader's fortress wasn't entirely secure. At one point, a rebel ship crashed near the castle, and Vader had to deal with the infiltration. The dark side energies on Mustafar affected visitors, driving some insane with visions. An Imperial inspector named Vanay arrived to investigate reports of stormtroopers going mad, only to succumb to the lava fumes himself. Rather than execute or abandon him, Vader made Vanay his personal attendant. The man became devoted to the Dark Lord, serving him for years, maintaining the fortress, ensuring Vader's chambers were prepared. Vanay's presence gave the castle an occupied, living quality, rather than being merely an empty stronghold. Throughout the years of the Empire's reign, Vader hunted the few remaining Jedi who'd survived Order 66. The Jedi Purge wasn't a single event, but a sustained campaign lasting decades. Vader led the Inquisitorius, a group of fallen Jedi who'd been tortured and turned to the dark side, now serving the Empire as Jedi hunters. The Grand Inquisitor, a Padawan who'd once guarded the Jedi archives, commanded these dark side operatives under Vader's direct authority. The Inquisitors were trained in lightsaber combat, taught to use the dark side, and sent throughout the galaxy to find Force-sensitive children and surviving Jedi. But Vader himself took personal interest in hunting the most powerful survivors. He tracked down Jedi Masters, former council members, legendary warriors who'd escaped the initial purge. Each hunt was methodical. Vader used the Empire's vast resources, intercepted communications, followed leads developed by Imperial intelligence. When he found his targets, the confrontations were brutal and often one-sided. Many Jedi had gone into hiding, deliberately suppressing their connection to the Force to avoid detection. Years without proper training, years of fear and isolation, had dulled their skills. They were no match for Vader at the height of his dark side power. Some encounters were more challenging. Jedi Master Eth Koth, a Zabrak who'd served on the Council, survived the initial purge and went into hiding. When Vader tracked him down, Koth had started a family, abandoned his Jedi identity for a normal life. The confrontation forced Koth to fight, to defend his wife and infant daughter. Vader killed him anyway, taking the Jedi's lightsaber as a trophy. The infant, potentially Force-sensitive, was taken by the Inquisitors. Vader showed no mercy, no recognition that Koth's choice to start a family mirrored his own desires before his fall. The Dark Lord was beyond such considerations. His mission was to eliminate every Jedi, and personal histories were irrelevant to that goal. Another significant hunt involved the former Jedi Cere Junda and her former Padawan Cal Kestis. Cere had broken under Inquisitor torture and revealed the location of her apprentice, leading to Cal's capture and subsequent fall to the dark side, temporarily. Though Cal resisted full corruption and escaped, Cere was racked with guilt. She cut herself off from the Force entirely, becoming a rebel operative instead. When Vader eventually encountered her years later on Mustafar itself, she'd reconnected with the Force and fought to protect Cal. The duel was fierce. Cere was a powerful Jedi, skilled with a lightsaber, and she fought with desperation. But Vader overwhelmed her, killing her despite her strength. Cal escaped, but the encounter demonstrated Vader's ruthlessness. Even skilled Jedi, even those fighting for students they loved, fell before his power. The hunt for Jedi was personal for Vader in ways the Empire didn't understand. Every Jedi he killed was a reminder of what he'd lost, of the order that had failed him, of the identity he'd abandoned. He fought with a fury that went beyond duty. When his blade cut down former comrades, when he extinguished the last light of Jedi who'd once trusted him, Vader was destroying pieces of Anakin Skywalker. Each death was both vengeance and self-annihilation, a way to ensure that the past could never return, that the person he'd been was truly gone. Yet Vader couldn't completely destroy Anakin's influence. Beneath the armor, beneath the darkness, fragments remained. His exceptional piloting skills persisted, refined by years of experience, but fundamentally the same instincts Anakin had possessed. When Vader flew a TIE advanced starfighter, when he navigated asteroid fields or engaged enemy fighters, the movements were pure Anakin. The joy Anakin had found in flying was gone, replaced by cold efficiency. But the ability remained. Vader was considered one of the best pilots in the Imperial Navy, and his custom TIE fighter was modified with shields and enhanced weapons, reflecting both his status and his skills. Vader's mechanical aptitude also persisted. He understood technology intuitively, could repair systems others found incomprehensible, could modify equipment to exceed its original specifications. His armor required constant maintenance, and Vader performed much of it himself, unwilling to trust technicians with his life support systems. He built specialized tools, modified his prosthetics incrementally, created equipment specifically suited to his needs. The tinkering reminded him of childhood on Tatooine, though he refused to acknowledge the connection. Anakin had built droids and pod racers. Vader maintained weapons and armor. The surface had changed, but the underlying skill was identical. Most significantly, Vader's capacity for attachment never truly died. Palpatine tried to eliminate it, to create a servant devoted only to the dark side and the Emperor. But Vader formed connections despite himself. He respected certain Imperial officers who demonstrated competence and loyalty. Admiral Kendall Ozzel was not among them. Vader force-choked Ozzel to death for incompetence during the hunt for the rebel base. But Admiral Firmus Piet, who replaced Ozzel, earned a measure of Vader's regard through consistent performance. Vader worked effectively with Grand Moff Tarkin, recognizing a kindred ruthlessness and strategic mind. The two commanders coordinated Imperial operations throughout the Outer Rim, establishing an efficient, if terrifying, system of control. Vader also formed an unexpected bond with Dr. Aphra, an amoral archaeologist who specialized in Sith artifacts. Aphra worked for Vader in secret operations the Emperor couldn't know about, helping him build a personal droid army and recover ancient weapons. She was resourceful, cunning, and willing to do whatever necessary to survive. Vader found her useful, but also developed something approaching respect for her abilities. When she eventually betrayed him, he tried to kill her, but without the thoroughness he applied to true enemies. Aphra survived, and Vader didn't pursue her with the determination he could have. The relationship, dysfunctional as it was, represented Vader forming a connection outside Palpatine's control. Then there was Luke Skywalker. Vader discovered his son's existence 3 years after the Battle of Yavin, when the Emperor revealed that the rebel pilot who'd destroyed the Death Star was Anakin Skywalker's child. The revelation shook Vader to his core. Padme had given birth before dying. He had a son. The child had survived, had been hidden from him, had grown up to become a rebel and a potential Jedi. Vader's immediate instinct was complex. He wanted to find Luke, to turn him to the dark side, to have family again. But he also wanted to overthrow Palpatine, to break free from his master's control. With Luke at his side, both strong in the Force, they could rule the galaxy together. It was ambition and longing twisted together, a dark side corruption of paternal love. The hunt for Luke became Vader's obsession. He deployed probe droids throughout the galaxy, searching for the rebel base and for his son. When the rebels were located on Hoth, Vader led the assault personally. The battle saw him walking through Echo Base, cutting down rebel soldiers, searching for Luke. He didn't find him. Luke escaped, fleeing with his friends. But Vader set a trap, using Luke's companions as bait. He knew the boy would come to save them. It was what Jedi did, what Anakin would have done. Vader understood his son because he'd once been similar. The trap was Cloud City on Bespin. Vader arrived before Luke, taking over the mining facility, torturing Han Solo to draw Luke through his Force connection. When Luke finally arrived, Vader was ready. The duel between father and son was one-sided. Luke had minimal training, barely able to deflect Vader's attacks, let alone mount an effective offense. Vader toyed with him, gauging his abilities, impressed by the raw potential, but unimpressed by the execution. He easily disarmed Luke, cutting off his hand in an echo of what Obi-Wan had done to him on Mustafar. With Luke, cornered, helpless, Vader revealed the truth. He was Luke's father. Obi-Wan had lied. Vader offered Luke the chance to join him, to embrace the dark side, to overthrow the Emperor together. Luke refused. Rather than accept Vader's offer, rather than turn to darkness, Luke threw himself into the abyss at the center of Cloud City, choosing possible death over joining the Sith. He survived, rescued by his friends, but the encounter left both father and son changed. Luke knew the truth now, knew that the greatest villain in the galaxy was his father, that the blood of Darth Vader ran through his veins. The knowledge tormented him, made him question his own nature. Could he resist the dark side if his father hadn't? Vader, meanwhile, had found something he'd thought lost forever. Connection. His son was alive, was powerful, could be saved from the lies of the Jedi. The obsession deepened. The Emperor, learning of Luke's existence and potential, decided the boy should be turned or destroyed. Palpatine had no intention of allowing Vader to have an apprentice who might help overthrow him. The Sith Master began maneuvering to either corrupt Luke or kill him, whichever proved easier. Vader found himself in a precarious position. He wanted Luke as an ally, wanted to turn him to the dark side, but Palpatine would never allow it. The Emperor's plan was transparent to Vader. Palpatine would turn Luke, then discard Vader for a younger, more powerful apprentice. Or Luke would resist, and Palpatine would kill him. Either outcome was unacceptable. The construction of the second Death Star provided the stage for the final confrontation. The Emperor revealed the battle station's existence to the rebels, allowing intelligence about its location to leak deliberately. It was a trap. The Death Star was operational despite appearances otherwise, and the Emperor himself would be present, overseeing the destruction of the rebel fleet. Luke would come. Palpatine was certain of it. The boy would sense his father's presence, would try to redeem Anakin Skywalker. That attempt would provide the opportunity to corrupt or kill him. Luke surrendered to Imperial forces on Endor, asking to be taken to Vader. The meeting between father and son on the forest moon was emotionally charged. Luke tried to reach Anakin, insisted that the good man still existed beneath the armor. Vader rejected this, claimed Anakin Skywalker was dead, that only Vader remained. But his certainty was weakening. Luke's compassion, his refusal to accept Vader's darkness, his insistence that redemption was possible, all of it created doubt. Vader brought Luke to the Death Star, presenting him to the Emperor as ordered, but the conflict within him was growing. Palpatine orchestrated the confrontation perfectly. He sat in his throne room aboard the Death Star, Luke and Vader before him, while the rebel fleet engaged the Imperial forces outside. The Emperor taunted Luke, revealed the trap, showed him the rebel fleet dying, tried to provoke him to anger. Luke resisted initially, but when Palpatine suggested turning Leia, Luke's sister, to the dark side instead, Luke attacked. Vader intercepted him, and the duel began. Father fought son, red blade against green, while the Emperor watched. The fight ranged throughout the throne room. Vader was more aggressive than on Bespin, pressing Luke hard, trying to force him to tap into his anger. Luke defended, but wouldn't fully commit to the attack, wouldn't give in to his fury. Vader probed Luke's thoughts through the Force, sensing his feelings, discovering Luke had a sister. The revelation gave Vader new leverage. If Luke wouldn't turn, perhaps Leia could be found and brought to the dark side instead. Vader spoke the threat aloud, suggesting that Leia might be easier to turn than Luke. The words broke Luke's restraint. He attacked with absolute fury, channeling his rage, his fear for his sister, his desperation. The onslaught drove Vader back, overwhelming his defenses, battering him with powerful strikes. Luke's assault was purely dark side, fueled by emotion, by attachment, by everything the Jedi warned against. He severed Vader's hand, destroying the cybernetic limb, leaving his father helpless. In that moment, Luke stood over Vader, weapon raised, ready to kill, having given in to his anger completely. The Emperor was delighted, encouraging Luke to strike down his father, to take Vader's place at Palpatine's side. But Luke looked at Vader's severed mechanical hand, looked at his own mechanical hand from Bespin, and saw where the dark path led. He saw that he was becoming like Vader, that giving in to his emotions would transform him into everything he'd been fighting against. Luke deactivated his lightsaber and threw it away. He refused the Emperor's offer, declared himself a Jedi like his father before him, chose the light side even if it meant death. Palpatine's delight turned to fury. If Luke wouldn't turn, he would die. The Emperor unleashed Force lightning, bolts of electrical energy that tore through Luke's body, causing agony beyond description. Luke writhed under the assault, screaming, his body convulsing. He called out to Vader, begging his father to help him. Vader stood, watching his son tortured to death, and the Emperor commanded him to witness the end of the Jedi. The moment stretched. Luke was dying, Palpatine was killing him. Vader had a choice. For the first time in over 2 decades, Anakin Skywalker made a choice for love rather than power. He grabbed the Emperor, lifting him despite the Force lightning now coursing through his own body, destroying his life support systems. Vader carried Palpatine to the edge of the throne room shaft and threw him down into the reactor core. The Emperor fell, his screams echoing, his body disappearing into the depths. Palpatine, the master manipulator, the architect of the Clone Wars, the destroyer of the Jedi Order, the creator of Darth Vader, was dead. Vader collapsed, his armor smoking, his systems failing. Luke dragged his father away from the shaft, tried to help him, to save him. But Vader knew it was too late. The Force lightning had destroyed the life support systems. He was dying, and there was no way to prevent it. Vader asked Luke to remove his mask, to let him see his son with his own eyes rather than through electronic lenses. Luke resisted, knowing it would kill him. Vader insisted. Luke carefully removed the helmet, breaking the seals, revealing the scarred, pale face beneath. Anakin Skywalker looked at his son with organic eyes for the first time, seeing Luke's face clearly, and smiled. He told Luke he'd been right. There had been good in him after all. Then Anakin Skywalker died, redeemed in his final moments, having destroyed the Sith and saved his son. Luke escaped the Death Star before it exploded, carrying his father's body. He burned Vader's armor on a funeral pyre on Endor, following Jedi tradition. The man who'd been the Empire's greatest enforcer, who'd terrorized the galaxy for decades, who'd killed countless innocents, was mourned by his son. Luke saw beyond the monster to the man, understood that Vader had been both victim and villain, that the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker deserved recognition alongside the evil of Darth Vader. That night, Luke saw Force spirits. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Anakin Skywalker appeared to him, visible through the Force, proof that Anakin had returned to the light. The Jedi who'd fallen so far, who'd become the very thing he'd sworn to destroy, had found redemption in his last act. The prophecy of the Chosen One was fulfilled. Anakin brought balance to the Force, not by serving the light or the dark, but by destroying the Sith. Palpatine and Vader both died on the Death Star, ending the Sith lineage that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. The legacy of Darth Vader extended far beyond his death. The Empire fractured without the Emperor and his enforcer, splintering into warlord territories and eventually collapsing into the New Republic. But Vader's influence persisted. His grandson, Ben Solo, son of Leia and Han, became obsessed with Vader's legacy. Ben saw his grandfather as a figure of strength, of power, of someone who'd achieved greatness through the dark side. He didn't understand the pain, the loss, the ultimate futility of Vader's path. Ben turned to the dark side, took the name Kylo Ren, and tried to emulate Vader. He wore a mask like his grandfather's, used a cross-guard lightsaber, sought to finish what Vader had started. The obsession led him down the same destructive path, creating suffering for his family and the galaxy. Vader's reputation also persisted in galactic consciousness. Imperial loyalists remembered him as the Empire's greatest warrior, a symbol of power and authority. Rebel historians recorded his atrocities, the planets he'd subjugated, the rebels he'd killed. Stories spread throughout the galaxy. Some were true. Many were exaggerated. Vader became myth, a figure whose reality was obscured by legend. People spoke of his power in hushed whispers, debated whether he'd been redeemed or whether his final act couldn't erase decades of evil, wondered what the galaxy would have become if he'd never turned to darkness. The physical artifacts of Vader's life became objects of interest and danger. His castle on Mustafar remained, a dark monument to his years serving the Empire. Luke eventually visited the fortress, searching for Sith secrets, trying to understand his father's journey. What he found disturbed him. The dark side energies were overwhelming, the fortress designed to channel malevolence. He discovered his father's contemplations on power, on loss, on the nature of the Force. He found evidence of Vader's attempts to resurrect Padme, the desperate futility of trying to undo death. The experience taught Luke that Vader had been suffering constantly, that the armor had been both prison and penance, that every moment of his existence had been agony. Vader's lightsaber, recovered from the Death Star wreckage, became a relic. It eventually made its way to various collectors before being hidden away, a weapon too dangerous to allow into the wrong hands. The helmet, partially destroyed in the Death Star explosion, became a symbol Kylo Ren obsessed over. He kept it in his quarters, spoke to it as though his grandfather's spirit remained within, sought guidance from the burned metal and shattered electronics. The helmet had no power, no spirit, but Kylo's obsession gave it meaning. It represented the dark side's allure, the seductive promise of power that had destroyed Anakin Skywalker and would threaten to destroy his grandson. The question of Vader's redemption remains debated. Did his final act of saving Luke and destroying Palpatine erase the decades of atrocity? Can someone responsible for genocide, for the destruction of the Jedi Order, for countless deaths across the galaxy, be forgiven because they turned good in their last moments? The answer depends on perspective. From a cosmic force perspective, Anakin fulfilled his destiny, brought balance, returned to the light. From a moral perspective, the lives he destroyed cannot be undone. The suffering he caused cannot be erased. Redemption doesn't mean the evil is forgotten. It means the person changed, chose differently, broke the cycle they'd been trapped in. What's undeniable is that Vader's story is one of the most tragic in galactic history. A child born into slavery, freed only to be thrust into a religious order that didn't understand how to help him, trained by people who feared his power, manipulated by a Sith Lord who exploited every vulnerability, transformed into a monster by his own choices and the cruelty of those around him. Vader was victim and perpetrator, slave and master, light and dark. His life encompassed the full spectrum of possibility, from the pure innocence of a child who wanted to help people to the corrupted darkness of a Sith Lord who enforced tyranny. Understanding Vader requires acknowledging the complexity. He wasn't born evil. He chose evil, but those choices were influenced by trauma, by fear, by manipulation, by 1,000 small failures of the system that should have protected him. The Jedi Order failed him by not addressing his fears and attachments properly. Palpatine exploited him with calculated cruelty. Padme's death, whether by Vader's hand or by lost will, destroyed the last light in his life. Each factor contributed to the transformation from Anakin to Vader, from Jedi to Sith, from hero to villain. But Vader also made genuine choices. He chose to slaughter the Tusken Raiders. He chose to betray Mace Windu. He chose to kill the younglings in the Jedi Temple. He chose to hunt down and murder his former comrades. These weren't forced upon him. They were decisions he made, actions he took, evil he committed willingly. The tragedy doesn't erase the responsibility. Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader through a combination of circumstance and choice, and both elements must be acknowledged to understand the full truth. The final redemption, the moment when Vader chose to save Luke, represents the possibility of change. Even someone as fallen as Vader, even after decades of serving darkness, could choose differently. The light never completely dies if even a fragment remains. Luke's faith in his father wasn't naive. It was founded on the belief that people can change, that goodness can resurface, that redemption is always possible for those who genuinely seek it. Vader's final act proved Luke right. The good man did still exist beneath the armor, buried under pain and rage and loss, but not entirely destroyed. Vader's relationship with the Force was unique among dark side users. Most Sith sought power for its own sake, viewing the Force as a tool to be dominated and controlled. Vader's relationship was more complex. He hated the Force for what it had allowed to happen to him, for the power it gave him that hadn't been enough to save his mother or his wife. But he also relied on it completely, using it to compensate for his physical limitations, to enforce his will, to hunt his enemies. The Force was both gift and curse, source of strength and reminder of failure. His connection remained extraordinarily powerful despite his injuries. Some Sith theorists believed that Vader's potential had been diminished by the loss of his organic body, that his maximum possible power had been reduced to approximately 80% of what it might have been. Whether this was true or not, Vader's actual power was still overwhelming. He could crush metal with gestures, stop blaster fire in mid-flight, sense presences across vast distances. His telekinetic abilities were refined to surgical precision, capable of delicate manipulations or devastating attacks depending on need. His ability to resist Force attacks was formidable, his will strong enough to throw off mental influences that would have controlled weaker minds. Vader's presence in the Force was distinctive. Those sensitive to the Force could feel him coming, a wave of darkness and cold that preceded his physical arrival. The feeling was suffocating, oppressive, a weight on the soul that made hope difficult and fear easy. Jedi described encountering Vader's presence as facing an abyss, a void where compassion should exist, a hunger that consumed light. The sensation wasn't entirely accurate. Beneath the darkness, fragments of Anakin remained, but they were buried so deep, surrounded by so much pain and rage, that they were nearly impossible to detect. His Force abilities included several specialized techniques. Vader was exceptionally skilled at Force choke, the telekinetic ability to crush someone's windpipe from a distance. He used it frequently to discipline Imperial officers, sometimes killing them, sometimes releasing them at the last moment as a warning. The technique reflected his nature. It was personal, intimate, allowing him to watch his victims suffer, to see their fear and desperation. It was also practical, requiring no weapons, no physical contact, usable at range. Vader could kill with a thought and a gesture, making him constantly dangerous even when seemingly unarmed. He was also skilled at Force sense, the ability to detect other Force users and strong emotions. Vader could feel Luke across vast distances, could sense his son's presence on Endor through the Force. He could detect lies, read surface thoughts, perceive hidden enemies. This ability made him nearly impossible to ambush or deceive. Subordinates learned quickly that lying to Vader was suicide. He would know, and the consequences would be immediate and lethal. The constant awareness also meant Vader experienced the emotions of those around him. The fear, the hatred, the desperation. He felt all of it, a constant barrage of negative emotions that fed his dark side connection, but also isolated him further from any positive human contact. Vader's use of telekinesis extended beyond combat applications. He could manipulate objects with extraordinary precision, could repair his own armor through Force-guided movements when his cybernetic hands lacked sufficient dexterity. He could hold multiple objects simultaneously, could throw them with deadly accuracy. During the hunt for Luke, Vader ripped equipment off walls and hurled it with casual ease, demonstrating power that went beyond normal telekinetic capability. The only significant limitation was his inability to generate Force lightning due to his cybernetic components. That power remained forever beyond his reach, a constant reminder of his vulnerability to Palpatine's primary weapon. Throughout his years as Vader, he maintained complex relationships with various individuals. His partnership with Grand Moff Tarkin was based on mutual respect and shared ruthlessness. Both men understood power, understood that fear and overwhelming force were effective tools of control. They worked together efficiently, coordinating military operations, discussing strategy, implementing the Emperor's will. Tarkin was one of the few Imperial officers Vader treated as something approaching an equal, though Vader's Force abilities and status as the Emperor's apprentice meant he ultimately outranked even Tarkin. His interactions with other Imperial officers ranged from professional to lethal. Admiral Piet survived working with Vader longer than most because he was competent, decisive, and careful not to fail. When mistakes occurred, Piet accepted responsibility and worked to correct them rather than making excuses. Vader appreciated this. He had no patience for incompetence, but he could work with those who learned from failures and adapted. Officers who repeated mistakes, who blamed subordinates for their own errors, who demonstrated cowardice, those officers didn't survive long under Vader's command. The dynamic between Vader and the Inquisitors was hierarchical and distant. The Inquisitors served him, hunted Jedi under his direction, but Vader viewed them as tools rather than students or colleagues. He trained them in dark side techniques sufficient for hunting Jedi, but never shared the deeper Sith knowledge reserved for true apprentices. When Inquisitors failed, Vader punished them without hesitation. When they succeeded, he acknowledged results but offered no warmth or genuine approval. The Grand Inquisitor understood this dynamic and accepted it, knowing his place in the Imperial hierarchy and not overreaching. Vader's feelings about the Jedi Order remained conflicted throughout his time as a Sith. He hunted Jedi with determination, killed them without mercy, yet part of him remembered what the Order had represented. They were flawed, certainly. Their rigid adherence to detachment had contributed to his fall. Their inability to help him with his fears and attachments had left him vulnerable to Palpatine's manipulation. But they'd also been guardians of peace, defenders of the innocent, warriors who fought for justice rather than power. Vader destroyed them, not just because the Emperor ordered it, but because every Jedi represented the path he'd abandoned, the person he might have been if things had gone differently. Some of the Jedi Vader hunted recognized him as Anakin Skywalker. Their reactions varied. Some were shocked, unable to reconcile the heroic general they'd known with the Sith Lord before them. Others felt betrayed, viewing Vader as a traitor who'd destroyed everything they'd fought to protect. A few tried to reach Anakin, to appeal to the good they believed still existed. Vader killed them all regardless of their reactions. He couldn't allow Anakin to resurface, couldn't afford to remember what he'd lost. The only way to continue existing was to bury Anakin completely, to embrace Vader fully, to make the transformation absolute. When confronted with Force-sensitive children, Vader's behavior revealed interesting complexities. The Inquisitors kidnapped Force-sensitive children for potential training as future Inquisitors or simply to prevent them from becoming Jedi. Vader oversaw this program, but showed occasional unexpected mercy. In some cases, when children were too young or not strong enough in the Force to be useful, he allowed them to be returned to their families rather than killed. It was inefficient, potentially dangerous to leave Force-sensitives alive, but perhaps some fragment of Anakin, remembering his own childhood, couldn't quite bring himself to order the execution of innocent children who reminded him of what he'd been. Vader's personal quarters aboard his Star Destroyer and in various Imperial facilities were stark, utilitarian. He had no need for decoration or comfort. The meditation chambers were the only spaces designed for anything beyond pure function, equipped with Bacta tanks and specialized equipment allowing him to remove his armor briefly. These moments of vulnerability were intensely private. Vader allowed no one to see him without the armor except medical droids and occasionally Palpatine. The Emperor used these moments to humiliate Vader, to remind him of his dependence, to emphasize that without the armor he was weak, broken, barely alive. The constant pain Vader experienced served multiple purposes for Palpatine. It fueled Vader's dark side connection, providing an endless source of suffering to channel into power. It kept him dependent on the Empire's medical facilities and technicians. It reminded him constantly of his failures, of Mustafar, of everything he'd lost. Palpatine designed the situation deliberately, ensuring his apprentice would never be comfortable, never be at peace, never have the luxury of forgetting what he'd become. The cruelty was calculated, intended to create the perfect weapon, powerful, ruthless, utterly committed to the dark side, because there was nothing else left. Yet Vader endured. Day after day, year after year, he continued existing despite the agony, despite the isolation, despite the absolute emptiness of his life. He had nothing to live for except duty, except the mission, except the slim hope that perhaps one day he might overthrow Palpatine and rule in his place. It was a grim existence, devoid of joy or love or peace. Vader experienced only pain, rage, and the brief satisfaction of completed missions. His life was purgatory, an endless punishment for his crimes, and he accepted it because he believed he deserved nothing better. The revelation of Luke's existence changed this calculation. Suddenly Vader had something beyond duty and pain. He had a son, family, a connection to Padme that had survived. The discovery gave him purpose beyond simply serving the Emperor. He wanted to turn Luke to the dark side, genuinely believed that joining him would be better for Luke than remaining with the doomed rebellion. But he also wanted Luke for himself, wanted family, wanted someone who shared his blood and his Force potential. The desire was selfish and corrupted by the dark side, manifesting as plans to overthrow the Emperor and rule with Luke. But underneath the dark ambitions, the fundamental motivation was human. Vader wanted his son, wanted to not be alone anymore, wanted to have something that mattered beyond missions and pain. Luke's refusal to turn, his insistence on seeing good in Vader, his willingness to die rather than join the dark side, all of it forced Vader to confront what he'd become. Luke was what Anakin might have been, what he should have been. Powerful but compassionate, strong but merciful, willing to sacrifice himself for others rather than sacrificing others for himself. Watching Luke choose death over darkness, seeing his son tortured by Palpatine, Vader finally understood that power meant nothing if you lost your humanity in pursuit of it. All the strength he'd gained as a Sith hadn't saved anyone he loved. It had only brought more death, more suffering, more loss. The choice to save Luke was choosing love over power, light over darkness, redemption over damnation. It was rejecting everything Vader had been for 2 decades, everything the Sith represented, everything Palpatine had taught. It was accepting that Anakin Skywalker still existed somewhere beneath the armor and the pain and the darkness. It was choosing to die as a Jedi rather than continue living as a Sith. The decision cost Vader his life, but it saved his soul. The Force welcomed him back, allowed him to transcend death as Force spirits did, granted him peace that had been absent since Padme died. The impact of Vader's story on Luke was profound and lasting. Luke spent years trying to understand his father, trying to reconcile the hero of the Clone Wars with the villain of the Empire, trying to determine what lessons could be learned from such a complete fall and final redemption. When Luke eventually established a new Jedi Order, he tried to learn from the old Order's mistakes, tried to create an organization that wouldn't push students toward darkness through rigid inflexibility. But he also struggled with fear that he might fail his students the way the old Order had failed Anakin, that his own teachings might inadvertently create another Vader. Those fears proved prophetic when Ben Solo fell. Luke blamed himself, believed he'd failed his nephew the way the old Jedi had failed his father. The guilt drove him into exile, made him question whether the Jedi should continue existing at all. If the Order had failed Anakin and he had failed Ben, perhaps the Jedi caused more harm than good. Perhaps the galaxy would be better off without them. It took Rey, another student, another chance at redemption, to pull Luke out of his despair, to remind him that failure was part of growth, that the Jedi represented hope despite their imperfections. Vader's influence on galactic history extended into military and political spheres as well. His tactics and strategies were studied by Imperial and later First Order commanders, analyzed for insights into effective warfare. His use of fear as a tool of control became doctrine for authoritarian regimes. His personal combat effectiveness inspired entire training programs designed to create warriors capable of similar feats. None succeeded in replicating his combination of force power, cybernetic enhancement, and combat experience. But the attempts influenced military development for generations. The philosophical implications of Vader's life continue being debated by Force scholars and historians. His existence challenged simple distinctions between light and dark, good and evil. He demonstrated that good people could choose evil, that evil people could choose good, that redemption was possible even for the most fallen. He proved that the Force could be used by someone simultaneously suffering and inflicting suffering, that power didn't require peace or balance in the wielder. His life suggested that prophecy and destiny weren't straightforward, that the Chosen One could fulfill his purpose through darkness as much as light, that balance might require destruction before reconstruction. The armor itself became a symbol studied across the galaxy. Engineers analyzed its design, noting the deliberate inefficiencies Palpatine had built into the system. Medical professionals examined the life support technology, recognizing how it could have been improved but deliberately wasn't. The armor represented the intersection of technology and torture, a marvel of engineering perverted into an instrument of suffering. Later prosthetic designers studied Vader's cybernetics to understand what not to do, how not to integrate mechanical components with organic tissue, how medical technology should serve the patient rather than control them. Vader's castle on Mustafar became a dark pilgrimage site for those studying the Sith. The Acolytes of the Beyond, a dark side cult that emerged after the Empire's fall, sought artifacts from the fortress, believing they contained residual dark side energy. The tuning towers continued channeling the planet's force nexus even after Vader's death, creating an environment dangerous to anyone not trained in protecting themselves from dark side corruption. Luke's visit there was brief but impactful, confirming his understanding that his father had existed in constant agony, surrounded by reminders of his greatest failures. The fortress also contained Vader's personal archives, data stores with information he'd gathered over decades of serving the Empire, including intelligence on rebel operations, profiles of surviving Jedi, notes on dark side techniques, and personal reflections he'd recorded in private moments. These archives were heavily encrypted, protected by systems designed to kill unauthorized users. When eventually accessed by New Republic historians, they provided unprecedented insight into Vader's thoughts, his planning, his perspective on the galaxy. The recordings revealed a man who understood he was a monster, who knew his actions were evil, but who believed he had no choice, no path back to the light, no way to undo what he'd done. Some recordings focused on Padme. Vader had preserved every memory of her, stored hollows and images, recorded his recollections of their time together. He'd kept these files hidden from Palpatine, knowing the Emperor would use them against him or destroy them entirely. In his darkest moments, Vader would review these files, torturing himself with memories of what he'd lost, channeling the pain into his dark side power. The files demonstrated that Padme had never truly left his thoughts, that every action he took was shadowed by her absence, that the love that had driven him to darkness had never been extinguished, only twisted into something painful and destructive. Vader's relationship with his past as Anakin Skywalker was deliberately compartmentalized. He referred to Anakin in the third person, spoke of him as someone else, someone who'd died. This wasn't entirely affectation. The psychological trauma of his transformation, combined with the physical pain and the dark side corruption, had fundamentally altered his personality. Vader genuinely perceived himself as a different person than Anakin had been. The memories remained, but they felt distant, belonging to someone else's life. When forced to confront those memories, when reminded of who he'd been, Vader experienced profound discomfort, a destabilization of the identity he'd constructed to survive. This compartmentalization failed only when confronted with Luke. His son was undeniable proof that Anakin Skywalker had existed, had loved, had created life. Luke's face resembled Padmé's in certain lights. His determination echoed Anakin's younger self. His Force presence felt familiar in ways Vader couldn't ignore. Fighting Luke required fighting his own past, confronting what he'd been, acknowledging that Anakin hadn't completely died. The process was agonizing, forcing Vader to hold contradictory identities simultaneously. He was Vader, servant of the Emperor, Sith Lord, enforcer of tyranny. But he was also Anakin, father to Luke, husband to Padmé's memory, the Jedi who'd once fought for justice. The contradiction couldn't be sustained indefinitely. Luke's unwavering faith in Anakin's continued existence gradually eroded Vader's certainty that Anakin was dead. When Luke declared himself a Jedi like his father before him, he was claiming Anakin as a Jedi despite everything Vader had done. The statement rejected Vader's self-conception, insisted on seeing through the armor to the man beneath. That insistence, combined with Palpatine's attack on Luke, created the moment where Anakin could resurface. Vader couldn't save his son, but Anakin could. The father could do what the Sith Lord wouldn't. The distinction was crucial. Vader served the Emperor. Anakin loved his son. The conflict resolved when Anakin's love proved stronger than Vader's obedience. The physical act of destroying Palpatine required enormous strength. The Emperor's Force lightning was devastating, designed to kill quickly. Vader's armor conducted the electricity, amplifying the damage, destroying his life support systems catastrophically. Every moment he held Palpatine was agony multiplied beyond measure. But Anakin endured it, accepted the pain, embraced death as the cost of saving Luke. The sacrifice was genuine, undertaken with full knowledge that it was fatal, motivated purely by love rather than any hope of survival or reward. The conversation between Luke and Anakin after the Emperor's death revealed the man beneath the mask. Anakin's voice, no longer filtered through the vocabulator, was weak, damaged by years of breathing apparatus and the recent Force lightning. But it was human, recognizably the voice of the man who'd loved Padmé, who'd been Obi-Wan's apprentice, who'd fathered Luke and Leia. His words were simple, acknowledging Luke's faith, admitting he'd been right about the good remaining within Vader. There was no grand speech, no attempt to justify or explain, just a father speaking to his son in his final moments, grateful that he'd been saved from darkness, even if that salvation came at the cost of his life. Luke's decision to burn Vader's armor in a funeral pyre, rather than allowing the Empire to recover it, demonstrated respect for his father's memory. The armor had been Vader's prison, the physical manifestation of his fall. Destroying it through fire purified the remains, ensured the dark side artifacts couldn't be used by others, gave Anakin a funeral befitting a Jedi rather than a Sith. The flames consumed the black armor, the helmet, the cybernetics, leaving only ashes. It was fitting that the instrument of Vader's suffering should be destroyed, that Anakin's final rest should be free from the machinery that had kept him alive, but imprisoned. The appearance of Anakin's Force spirit confirmed his redemption from a cosmic perspective. The ability to retain consciousness after death, to appear as a Force ghost, was a light side technique. Only Jedi who'd achieved a certain level of understanding and peace could manifest this way. Dark side users faced oblivion or tormented half-existence as dark side spirits bound to specific locations. Anakin appeared alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda, recognized as one of them despite his decades as a Sith. The Force itself acknowledged his return to the light, granted him the peace he'd been denied in life. Interestingly, Anakin appeared as his younger self rather than the scarred, aged man who'd died. This suggested that his Force identity was tied to who he'd been before the fall, that the years as Vader were an aberration, a corruption of his true self. Luke saw his father as he'd been at his best, as the hero of the Clone Wars, the Jedi Knight who'd fought for the Republic. The appearance provided closure, allowed Luke to see that saving his father had truly restored him, that Anakin Skywalker lived on beyond death, free from pain and darkness. Leia's relationship with Vader's legacy was more complicated than Luke's. She'd been tortured by Vader aboard the Death Star, had watched him oversee the destruction of Alderaan, her homeworld. Learning he was her father was traumatic rather than redemptive. Where Luke saw a man who'd been saved, Leia saw a monster who'd caused immeasurable suffering, including directly to her. She struggled to reconcile the loving father Luke described with the Sith Lord who'd tortured her. For years, she couldn't accept Vader as her father, refused to acknowledge the connection beyond the biological fact. Only gradually did Leia come to understand what Luke had seen. She accessed her own memories through the Force, remembering her mother Padme from infancy, sensing the love her parents had shared. She studied the history of Anakin Skywalker, learned about the boy who'd been enslaved, the hero who'd fought in the Clone Wars, the man who'd fallen trying to save his wife. The knowledge didn't erase what Vader had done, but it provided context, made him comprehensible as a person rather than a personification of evil. By the time Leia had her own son, she'd achieved some measure of peace with her parentage, though she chose not to tell Ben Solo about his grandfather until forced to by circumstances. The decision to hide Ben's lineage backfired spectacularly. When Ben discovered through other sources that Darth Vader was his grandfather, he felt betrayed by his mother's secrecy. The revelation came at a vulnerable time in his training, when he was already struggling with the pull of the dark side. Rather than being warned away from Vader's path, Ben became fascinated with his grandfather's power, sought to emulate rather than avoid his legacy. Luke's momentary consideration of killing Ben to prevent another Vader pushed his nephew fully into darkness, creating the very thing they'd feared. The cycle repeated, grandson following grandfather into the dark side, destroying another generation's hopes. Kylo Ren's obsession with Vader bordered on worship. He kept the burned helmet, spoke to it seeking guidance, tried to finish what his grandfather had started. But Kylo fundamentally misunderstood Vader's story. He saw only the power, the authority, the strength that had made Vader the Empire's enforcer. He missed the suffering, the regret, the ultimate redemption. Kylo wanted to become like Vader at his darkest, not understanding that Vader himself had rejected that path in the end. The irony was profound. Kylo Ren tried to honor Vader by embracing everything Vader had ultimately died to reject. The contrast between Vader and Kylo revealed important differences. Vader fell to darkness through desperation, trying to save someone he loved. His transformation was gradual, driven by fear of loss and manipulated by Palpatine over years. Kylo's fall was more active, a choice made partly from the allure of power and partly from feeling betrayed by those who should have trusted him. Vader spent decades trying to convince himself Anakin was dead, that there was no path back. Kylo actively rejected opportunities to return, killed his own father in an attempt to commit fully to darkness. Yet both ultimately found redemption through family love. Vader was saved by his son's faith. Kylo was redeemed by Rey and the memory of his parents, particularly the vision of Han Solo. The pattern suggested something fundamental about the Skywalker bloodline. They fell hard to darkness when driven by strong emotions, but they could also return from darkness when confronted with genuine love and forgiveness. The capacity for both good and evil existed in extraordinary measure in this family line, making them simultaneously the galaxy's greatest hope and greatest danger. Vader's influence on lightsaber combat philosophy persisted long after his death. His adaptation to fighting with prosthetics, his incorporation of telekinesis into combat, his psychological warfare techniques all became subjects of study. Jedi historians examining his fighting style recognized both the brilliance of his adaptations and the tragedy underlying them. Anakin had been one of the greatest duelists the Jedi Order ever produced, capable of flowing acrobatic sequences and devastating precision. Vader retained the precision but lost the mobility, forcing him to develop a style that was effective but represented diminishment rather than growth. Combat instructors noted how Vader turned limitations into strengths. His reliance on Form 5's power attacks compensated for reduced mobility. His use of single-hand techniques when fighting multiple opponents allowed his other hand to employ telekinesis simultaneously. His positioning prioritized protecting his chest plate above all else, making him predictable in some ways, but difficult to exploit because the predictability was deliberate. The defensive positioning meant opponents had to attack where Vader expected, allowing him to counter with prepared responses. The psychological dimension of Vader's combat approach deserves particular attention. Before engaging physically, he would often use the Force to project fear, to make opponents feel their own inadequacy. He spoke during combat, making observations designed to destabilize his opponent's confidence. When fighting Luke on Cloud City, he constantly reminded Luke of his lack of training, his weakness, his inevitable defeat. The commentary wasn't merely taunting. It was strategic, intended to make Luke doubt himself, to create openings through psychological pressure rather than physical assault. This technique proved devastatingly effective against Jedi survivors. Many had spent years in hiding, disconnected from the Force, questioning their own abilities. When confronted with Vader's overwhelming presence and his psychological warfare, their doubt became a weapon used against them. They hesitated, second-guessed, allowed fear to compromise their technique. Vader exploited these moments ruthlessly, turning mental weakness into physical vulnerability. The approach reflected Sith philosophy that power came from dominating others, from crushing their will before destroying their body. Against Luke, the technique ultimately failed because Luke's faith was stronger than Vader's fear projection. During their final duel, even when Vader discovered Leia's existence and used it to provoke Luke, the provocation backfired. Luke's rage made him powerful enough to defeat Vader physically, but his love for his sister also reminded him why he was fighting, what he would become if he gave in to darkness. The psychological warfare Vader had perfected encountered an opponent whose emotional connections were sources of strength rather than vulnerability. The galaxy's response to Vader's death was complex and varied. Imperial loyalists mourned the loss of their greatest warrior, viewing his death as a betrayal of everything the Empire represented. The fact that he'd destroyed the Emperor while doing so created confusion among hardline supporters who couldn't reconcile Vader's loyalty with his final act. Some claimed he'd been corrupted by the rebels, that Luke had somehow enslaved him through dark side techniques. Others accepted that Vader had turned traitor, making him a villain to be condemned alongside the rebels he'd aided. Rebel forces and later New Republic citizens had difficulty processing Vader's redemption. Billions had suffered under his rule. Planets had been subjugated by forces he commanded. Families had been destroyed by his actions. The revelation that he'd turned good at the very end, that he'd saved Luke Skywalker and killed the Emperor, didn't undo the decades of atrocity. Many rejected the idea of redemption entirely, argued that Vader's crimes were too severe for any final act to erase, insisted he should be remembered as a villain regardless of his last moments. Force-sensitive individuals often had different perspectives. Those trained in understanding the Force recognized the significance of Vader's return to the light, understood that the cosmic battle between light and dark had been won when Anakin rejected the dark side. They acknowledged that personal redemption and legal accountability were separate issues, that Vader could be forgiven by the Force while still being historically condemned for his actions. This nuanced view accepted the complexity of his story without trying to simplify it into pure heroism or absolute villainy. Historians studying the rise and fall of the Empire identified Vader as a central figure whose choices shaped galactic events. His execution of the Jedi Purge destroyed the Republic's Guardians, enabling Palpatine's consolidation of power. His enforcement of Imperial authority prevented rebellion from sparking earlier, giving the Empire decades of stable tyranny. His relationship with Luke created the circumstances that ultimately destroyed both Sith Lords and began the Empire's collapse. Without Vader, the Empire would have been different, perhaps less terrifying, but also potentially more stable, lacking both his capacity for violence and his eventual betrayal. The question of how to memorialize Vader revealed deep societal divisions. Some argued he should be remembered primarily as Anakin Skywalker, hero of the Clone Wars, with his time as Vader treated as a tragic fall and ultimate redemption. Others insisted he should be remembered as Darth Vader, Imperial Enforcer, with any redemption noted but not emphasized. A third perspective rejected any positive treatment, arguing that memorializing someone responsible for genocide was offensive regardless of his final acts. These debates continued for generations, reflecting broader questions about justice, redemption, and historical memory. Luke's position in these debates was clear but nuanced. He insisted his father deserved to be remembered as redeemed, that Anakin's return to the light was real and significant. But he never minimized Vader's crimes, never suggested the suffering caused should be forgotten or forgiven by its victims. Luke distinguished between personal forgiveness, which he offered freely, and societal accountability, which he acknowledged was necessary. He maintained that understanding Vader's full story, including both his crimes and his redemption, was important for preventing future tragedies. The medical community's study of Vader's cybernetics led to improvements in prosthetic technology. By examining what Palpatine had deliberately done wrong, engineers developed better integration techniques, more comfortable interfaces, life support systems that didn't require constant pain. Veterans who'd lost limbs in the Clone Wars or the Galactic Civil War benefited from these advances. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Vader's suffering, engineered deliberately to keep him controlled, had inadvertently provided the knowledge to prevent such suffering in others. Psychologists studying Vader's case identified his story as an extreme example of complex trauma leading to personality transformation. The loss of his mother, the pressures of being the chosen one, the impossible demands of the Jedi Order, the manipulation by Palpatine, the physical trauma on Mustafar, all contributed to creating Darth Vader from Anakin Skywalker. Mental health professionals used his case to illustrate how trauma could fundamentally alter someone, how pain could be weaponized, how healing required confronting rather than burying the past. The study emphasized that while Vader's actions couldn't be excused by his trauma, understanding the trauma was essential to understanding how the transformation occurred. The Jedi Order's failure to help Anakin became a central case study in how not to handle troubled students. Luke's new order implemented different approaches, recognizing that denying attachment was unrealistic and potentially harmful, that fear needed to be addressed rather than suppressed, that rigid rules often created the problems they intended to prevent. The changes weren't without controversy. Some argued Luke was abandoning essential Jedi principles, risking the creation of more emotionally driven Force users who might fall to darkness. Luke countered that the old way had created Vader, that any new approach deserved consideration. The prophecy of the Chosen One, which had driven much of Anakin's story, was re-examined extensively after Vader's death. Had Anakin fulfilled the prophecy? He'd destroyed the Sith, eliminating both Palpatine and himself, ending the lineage that had secretly controlled the galaxy for decades. But balance wasn't permanent. Darkness rose again in different forms. Some scholars argued the prophecy had been misinterpreted, that it referred to a single moment of balance rather than permanent equilibrium. Others suggested multiple chosen ones across history, each bringing temporary balance. A few dismissed the prophecy entirely as wishful thinking that had caused more harm than good. What remained undeniable was that Anakin's life had reshaped the galaxy. The Clone Wars, the Jedi Purge, the Empire's reign, the Rebellion's victory, all had flowed from his choices. He'd been hero and villain, savior and destroyer, the most important individual of his era, regardless of whether prophecy had predetermined his role. The galaxy before Anakin Skywalker was fundamentally different from the galaxy after Darth Vader, and his influence would echo through generations yet unborn. The ultimate legacy of Darth Vader is the reminder that people contain both light and darkness, that the capacity for good exists alongside the capacity for evil, that choices matter more than destiny. Anakin Skywalker was born with extraordinary potential, could have become the greatest Jedi in history, could have brought genuine, lasting peace to the galaxy. Instead, he became Darth Vader, an instrument of oppression and terror. But even after decades of darkness, even after countless atrocities, he could still choose differently, could still turn back towards the light, could still save his son and redeem his soul. The story doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't say that redemption erases consequences, that a good final act makes up for a lifetime of evil, that suffering justifies cruelty. Instead, it suggests that human beings are complex, that circumstances and choices interact in ways that create both monsters and heroes, sometimes within the same person. It acknowledges that people who do terrible things can still change, that the possibility of redemption always exists even if redemption doesn't eliminate responsibility. For Luke Skywalker and the galaxy he tried to heal after the Empire's fall, Vader represented both warning and hope. The warning was clear. Fear and attachment, when not properly addressed, could corrupt even the most powerful Force user. The best intentions could pave roads to horrific outcomes. Power without wisdom led to tyranny. The hope was equally clear. No one was beyond saving. Love could reach even the most fallen. Redemption was always possible for those willing to reject darkness and accept the costs of choosing light. Standing before Darth Vader's legacy, examining the life of Anakin Skywalker from slave child to Jedi Knight to Sith Lord to redeemed father, we see the full spectrum of human possibility, the capacity for greatness and the vulnerability to corruption, the power of love and the danger of attachment, the importance of choice and the influence of circumstance. His story is tragedy and redemption, a cautionary tale and an inspiration, a reminder that we all contain both light and darkness, and that the choices we make determine which prevails. Thank you for exploring the complete lore of Darth Vader with me. If you enjoyed this deep examination into one of Star Wars' most complex and tragic characters, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more comprehensive explorations of the characters, locations, and events that shape the galaxy far, far away. May the Force be with you, always.